Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today. Wanted to take a few moments to provide an update for you as much as we can relative to the investigation from yesterday's shooting at Boise Towne Mall. So what I want to convey to you is that we have been working with our local, state, and federal partners throughout the course of the night to process the crime scenes both outside of the mall as well as inside the mall. Earlier today, we were able to release the mall back to mall management's control. They're working and coordinating how to return the property of anybody who may be a victim as they fled, any property that may have been left behind. Decisions on when the mall will reopen is entirely up to the management, and those questions should be addressed to them. Right now, we've collected a variety of evidence. As many of you know, the coroner announced recently that our shooter, Jacob Bergquist, in this incident has passed away from his injuries. We've been conducting investigations related to Mr. Bergquist, looking at any social media information, any other evidence that we may have, anything to help us understand motivation. We've been working with our partners at the local, state, and federal level to conduct interviews of people who knew him to try and understand anything that we can about why this event happened and why it happened at the location it did. We're still very early on in that investigation, and there's not much information that I can share relative to that. Some of you are probably aware that we did conduct a search warrant at a location on North Fry that is related to this investigation, although the evidence taken from that location is still being processed at this time, and there's really not a lot that I can provide in addition to that, other than that we have taken items of interest from that location. I am sad to say that we have 2 victims that have passed away in this incident. I know that the coroner's office has released their names, and my hearts go out to the families of Joe Acker and Roberto Padilla. I can only imagine the grief that the family is going through and the unexpected nature of this tragedy. My heart goes out to any of those that were directly affected and the family members of those directly affected or injured in yesterday's events, as well as to the community at large as we struggle with this traumatic event that's occurred here. I know that we provided in the press release a timeline that essentially walks you through the events as we understand them at this time. I will be open for questions afterwards, but before I answer any questions that you may have, I'd like to turn over the microphone to our mayor. Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Well, hello again, everybody. I just want to say a couple things, some of which I said this morning. Yesterday was a hard day. It was a terrible day. And today is as well. It's incredibly difficult. And we will have many days ahead where all of us are questioning what happened, wondering why, and wondering what's next, and then how to heal. We lost 2 people from this community yesterday, and my hearts go out to the families of Joe Acker and Roberto Padilla. 3 people were hurt. An officer was hurt, and countless others faced trauma that no one should have to face. I want to say again, thank you to the shopkeepers, the employees at the mall, the shoppers, everyday Boiseans that went above and beyond yesterday when it was necessary. You helped each other out. I'm sure you helped save lives. And most importantly, you helped remind each of us that we step up when we need to. And you provided care in a moment that somebody next to you needed that, and I thank each of you for that. I, of course, am deeply grateful for our first responders, our police, our fire, our paramedics who arrived on the scene, a scene that was chaotic, made sense of it and protected so many people, and then showed compassion throughout and after as we had to clear them all. And then finally to Boise and to Boiseans. We are all hurting. That's normal. It's to be expected. It's not something that we ever want to experience ourselves, but we need to acknowledge that, because it is in that acknowledgement that we can have the important actions and conversations to help us heal moving forward. And so as we honor and respect the privacy of those who are most impacted by this horrible event, we're going to create opportunities for people to heal and to come together. And we'll have information soon on a vigil that people can participate in. But again, I'm going to ask everyone to honor the privacy of these families. And then finally, if any of you out there are feeling sad, alone, confused, worried, find someone to talk with. And if nothing else, we have a line available, the care line, that is so incredibly important to be used. You dial 211 and someone is there to help you. And again, thank everybody for stepping up yesterday. We've heard untold countless stories of folks that went above and beyond yesterday during these events. We've heard from so many people around this state, around this city, and around this country that they're thinking of us and each of you. And in the days to come, we will have opportunities to do what we do best, which is come together as community to honor the hurt that we're experiencing, and then to be stronger for it through this really tough time. Thank you.
I'd open the floor for questions. Sir on the red tie.
How long do the police intend to remain at the Boise Towne Square location?
So we will have an enhanced police presence there for the foreseeable future out of the public's concern. For obvious security reasons, I'm not going to talk about what that security footprint is, but there will be a noticeable visible presence. We'll determine at what time it seems best for us to start to draw back that presence. Yes, sir.
Chief, you mentioned it's a multi-state effort right now between you and other agencies. Can you discuss which states you're working with and what relation they may have to the suspect?
So what I think is fair to say in the investigation at this point, whenever we look at an incident like this involving an active shooter with murderous intent, we will go through, we'll contact family, we'll look at colleagues. Obviously, in this day and age, that involves several different states. We're leveraging our partnerships with our federal partners, the FBI particularly, to help make and conduct several of those interviews for us. But because the investigation is still ongoing, we may need to contact additional family members. I would not like to highlight at this time family or friends' locations in the states they're in.
I noticed that there was a police presence last night at the suspect's home. Is that something that's going to be also continued for the foreseeable future?
No. The presence that I believe you're speaking about, the Fry location, the presence there was simply so that we could secure the location until we could effect a search warrant on the location. That warrant is being executed today. We are gathering evidence. Once that's seen secure, there won't be a reason for a presence there anymore. Sure.
We're hearing certain rumors online about possible threats that may have been made by this individual in days or weeks prior to the events at the mall. Is that something you're aware of or that you can comment on?
We have heard similar rumors. Part of what we're doing is to capture all of their electronic footprint, social media information, and when I say, let me rephrase that, all of his electronic footprint and his social media. We've issued preservation orders through our colleagues, our federal partners, to ensure that that information remains, that it's intact for us to analyze. We're going through and looking to see whether or not that is fact or rumor at this time. We're still investigating it. To the issue of rumors, I think it's also important to address that we are aware of several rumors out there of, frankly, more conspiratorial in nature, of larger concerns. To all of our analysis, that is completely fictitious. The community is safe. This was an individual that acted cowardly and acted alone, and there is no threat to the community.
Do you have any details about the gun that was used?
I think the only safe thing to say about it, because there's obvious ballistic tests, other investigative things that have to occur, he did have a handgun with him that was used in all of the shooting. There were multiple rounds that were fired both inside as well as outside the mall. I think that's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the response the officers had. I think it's important to recognize that in one of these events, Unfortunately, they have occurred in other places. We've learned lessons from those occurrences. The early intervention is incredibly important. We had officers, from the time that we received a call to officers contacting and disrupting this cycle of violence, was roughly 2.5 minutes. Our officers that responded, as they responded to the location, as you'll see in the press release, came under immediate fire. Frankly, the courage, the willingness to step into harm's way, to risk their own lives and maybe not make it home to protect this community is what kept this from being a more grave tragedy.
Was this suspect, was his name perhaps familiar to the Boise Police Department?
We had contact with him in the past. We did not have any reason to arrest him. He was a known subject. He is the subject of other police reports.
Were some of those other police reports from state police down at the Capitol? That's another one of the rumors that is going around.
It is likely that, without having sat down and looked through all, I don't particularly want to talk about what records may or may not exist with another agency. That would probably be a fair question for the state police, though.
Can you talk a little bit about the response of the mall? I know a lot of store owners and so forth, sheltered some of the customers inside and just some of the things they did to respond to this and how they responded.
No, I would like to commend the shopkeepers, the employers at the mall, the employees of the mall, and the patrons at the mall. As I sadly mentioned before, this is not the first tragedy like this in American history. We have learned lessons from it. I'm sure that there will be lessons learned from this, but at first glance, when we look at this event, those at the mall responded admirably and did quickly what we have learned is best practice. They quickly ushered those patrons that were in their locations to back rooms. They closed and sheltered and secured so that they became inaccessible and minimized the risk of being victims. Other patrons inside the mall that recognized that they could quickly find avenues of egress self-evacuated out of the mall. I think it's important to mention that as we sit down and we talk about the number of injuries that we have, the numbers that the police department is citing are those that we know of that are captured in criminal reports at this time. It's highly likely, as you talk to our healthcare providers, that number could change, because it's very probable that as people self-evacuated, running for their lives, frankly, many of them probably sustained injuries, or required treatment for those injuries. We'll be connecting with them. Not only are they victims from the community sense, but in many cases they're also going to be victims of crimes, and that's part of the overall investigation that we have to continue to build out.
You mentioned that the suspect passed away. Was it ultimately a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head?
There's still ballistic tests that need to be done, as well as a coroner's final determination. That's not really appropriate for me to weigh in on what the cause of death is. That is the coroner's domain.
Going back to the weapons, do you know if they were obtained illegally?
That's all part of the work that we'll be doing with our federal partners. Part of this will be to look through any weapon or weapons that he had, what were the means to which he acquired them, whether or not they were legally possessed. But at this point in the investigation, given how close we are to the actual event, it's still very early to make any determinations.
Do you know, with the 68-year-old woman who's on Milwaukee, was that fired from officers, or is that from the suspect?
We're still working through all that determination. That's part of an OIS investigation from the Meridian Police Department. We will continue to look at that. There's obvious ballistic analysis that has to be performed for us to make a final determination on that.
Do you know how long the suspect was on location before the incident happened?
That timeline I have not seen, from when he actually entered the mall to sort of the first incident of violence. What I will say is that the time frame from when he decided to engage in homicidal violence to when the police responded and interrupted him is an incredibly short timeline.
Is there security footage that the mall has that you'll be using to investigate as well?
We're working with both the mall as well as the individual stores in there to capture any video footage, as well as any video footage from the outside. We have set up, and we'll make sure that you have the information, the ability for members of the public that may have captured video. In this day and age, almost everybody has a camera with them. We want to capture as much evidence as we can to thoroughly and accurately process this scene.
Will that video from surveillance cameras, security cameras, things like that, will that be released by you, or will that be up to the mall whether or not to release that?
I think that we're pretty early on in the investigation to make a determination about when any video would be released, but that would ultimately, that video, why it may be evidence in the crime, it's still the property of the mall. We'll have to work through the legalities of that issue if time comes.
And I know that you've kind of released a timeline of events. Could you kind of go over briefly from, as far as you understand, when he arrived at the mall and sort of the sequence of events?
I can't speak to when he exactly arrived at the mall. I think what is probably the easiest thing to say is when we first became aware of something. So roughly around 1:50, there were calls into the dispatch center, the Idaho County Dispatch Center, of shots being fired in Boise Towne Square Mall, and reports that a person was down. Shortly thereafter, there was additional calls in. Officers immediately began to respond to the area. They had a description that matched our deceased suspect. They had a description that was broadcast very early on. And again, within about 2 to 2.5 minutes, we have an officer that spots the individual matching that description. They quickly go to challenge and intervene and come under fire.
And at that point, did the suspect flee the premises of the mall at some point? And that's how they...
There were several shots that were fired inside the mall. The police encountered the suspect outside the mall, and that is all subject to the officer-involved shooting investigation.
I know it's still early, but was there any relationship between any of the victims and the suspect that you know at this time?
Not that we're aware of at this time, but those are things that we continue to look into. We want to understand any motivation, any cause here, if for no other greater reason, to learn everything we can to try and help prevent any future tragedies like this.
So just to be clear, there's no motive at this time that you guys are aware of?
We're still working to determine that.
In terms of the shots that were shot, I think when Willie said at the floor, you mean like at the floor, actually?
I'm sorry, you're just, with the mask, it's kind of hard to hear you.
In the release, you mentioned the shots that were shot at the floor. Does that mean like the floor or like throughout the floor, actually down at the ground?
We're still looking at the video. What we know is that they're shot at a downward angle and they impacted on the floor. I think we have the challenge of the suspect is deceased, the ability to interview and understand what, if anything, he may have been aiming at. We're going to have to work very carefully to repiece things through both video imagery and ballistics to determine if there was anything that was intentionally being aimed at.
Did the suspect work at the mall, or do you know if he had any relationship with the employees that were there?
We do not believe that he had any employment history with the mall. He was a subject that was known to the mall. He had frequented it before. Mall security had contacted him on past occasions.
About what exactly?
Other instances that had occurred at the mall. I think I have time maybe for one more question.
Can you describe any of those incidents and why the suspect was known to both Boise police, the mall, and maybe other law enforcement agencies?
They were generally what could be categorized as disorderly conduct sort of calls in nature, trespass calls in nature for sort of disruptive behavior. That would be appropriate to categorize how the mall viewed their interactions with him, as well as previous police contacts. Thank you very much for your time in coming out today.